Well, Jefferson City is actually probably worse than Washington right now. We have our own cast of bizarre characters on the Republican side. For example, in the Senate, we have Mary Elizabeth Coleman. We have Bill Eigel, who wants to be governor. We have Mike Moon, who once tore apart a chicken to show he was against abortion. We also have Nick Schroer, who we're not really sure where he lives. One, he was supposed to be a state rep representing O'Fallon. There were pictures of him walking in and out of a house in Defiance, about 25 miles away. But he claimed he rented a room in a 3-bedroom house in O'Fallon from a woman and her daughter. So anyway, we have our own cast of characters. In the House, we have a whole bunch who are just starting out, who are promising to be just as crazy as our senators. So when I start talking about things out of Jeff City and they seem too strange to believe, unfortunately, we have to believe it. For example, Mary Elizabeth Coleman wants to ban not just abortion, but Plan B pills and all other contraception. Contraception would be illegal in the state of Missouri if she had her way. We have Eigel, who, if you saw in the paper on the Missouri Independent online, is running for governor. And one of the reasons he's running, he says, is because Mike Parson, Mike Kehoe, and Jay Ashcroft are not Republican enough. In Bill Eigel's world, no Republican never votes for any tax increase. In other words, you let the whole system fall apart rather than fund it and take care of it. So we're going to go through some things tonight that are going on in Jeff City. The one that's getting the most attention and needs to be talked about a lot is reforms to what they call reforms to initiative petitions. Right now, it takes a vote of 50% plus one to make a change with an initiative petition. And if you've ever gathered signatures out in front of a post office or a grocery store, you know it's not an easy thing to get signatures. The Republicans decided a long time ago they didn't like initiative petitions now because too many things they don't like are getting passed. For example, we put in higher minimum wage in Missouri. We passed Clean Missouri, which they had a counter with Dirty Missouri. We got Medicaid expanded after the legislature ignored it for a decade. So what they want to do is go from a 50% majority, 50% plus one. The bill that has the most steam behind it would mean to pass anything on initiative petition, you would need at least a 60% vote. That 60% vote threshold is probably going to survive. There are some other details in the weeds, like maybe going up to 8 or 10% of the voters and right now it's 6 congressional districts, maybe going to 8% or 10% in all 8 congressional districts or things like that. But there's a very real effort, and this is going to be on the ballot in 2024, either in August or November. We'll have to vote to give away our right to put initiative petitions on the ballot by making it so much harder to happen. Even things people like Medicaid expansion, did not get 60%. There are also proposals to make it harder for voters to qualify. One big worry I have is that talking to people around the state, most of our major cities, we now sign our election ballot, we sign in on a screen with a piece of rubber. Try comparing signatures from a stylus on a piece of rubber to an initiative petition. Very easily, could the Secretary of State or a county clerk, if they want to, disallow a lot of things. And I moved into my current house 32 years ago. That's when I registered to vote from this address. My signature today is recognizable, but not the same as it was 32 years ago. And so I'm thinking, as part of this, we may have to start a movement among people, asking them to go in and update their registration so they have a more current signature on their ballot card or on their voter registration card in the counties. Also, another thing that's being pushed, and it's being pushed again as part of a broader agenda, is school choice. What they mean is a child could go to any school they want, any public school they want. The St. Clair, Missouri superintendent looked at the legislation and figured his district would lose about 100 kids because the kids would go to schools closer to their home rather than the district they're in. That's St. Clair. That's out in Franklin County area. That's a fairly small district. Imagine the havoc it could cause in the Metro St. Louis area, because a lot of kids want their kids to go to Ladue or Clayton. And the problem is they couldn't take all of them. So you'd have all these kids trying to move, getting frustrated. And that's kind of what they want, because their deep down long-term goal is to get rid of not just the idea of going to the school that you're assigned to, but getting to the idea where taxpayer money for education follows the child. If your kid wants to go to Parkway West, the money goes to Parkway West. If your kid wants to go to, I don't know, Narix Hall, your kid goes to Narix Hall and their money goes to Narix Hall. Money follows the child is a great income redistribution plan because it helps middle class and upper class families discount their education in private schools. That is the ultimate goal of many of the Republicans. And there are a few Republicans who do not like the idea of public education. They think, as it was in 1776, education is totally the parent's responsibility. So a lot of things you'll hear people arguing about, like opening the borders so kids can go to other districts, also is pushing the door open for a broader agenda that would hurt public education and result in state taxpayer funds going to private schools. But that's coming up. Another thing they're doing this year, the Missouri Legislature has decided that they know more about education than teachers, principals, and curriculum specialists. And so they've got a series of things they want to do. For example, the first thing is what they call the Parents' Bill of Rights. A teacher would have to have their curriculum online so parents could look at it, object if there's things in the curriculum they don't like, or more importantly, they could call their friends and rally against or work against things they don't like in the curriculum. I was talking to a teacher and she told me one of her big concerns is, say you have a class that's not getting something, like multiplying fractions. Today, a teacher has the discretion to spend more time on that unit and maybe bring in more materials to help the kids get the concept. Under the Parent Bill of Rights, they'd be locked into their curriculum and locked into their schedule. So if the kids didn't get multiplying fractions in 2 days, tough. The other thing is it would allow parents and in some versions of the bill, other people in the school district to complain about what is being taught. You've heard about Ron DeSantis and his anti-woke legislation. There are a great many people in Missouri, the Republicans have convinced that CRT is being taught in our grade schools. They've been convinced that white kids are being told to hate themselves for being white. They've been told that all the education establishment wants to do is create a class of children who will be little mindless drones who will perpetuate the liberal ideas of the people in education. Now, of all the teachers I know, a little bit more than half vote Democratic. I don't know why it's not 100%, but only about half vote Democratic. And in many cases in the metro area, the school teachers associations have not been pushing back hard on these issues. As we get later in the session and the parental, Bill of Rights starts bubbling up, it's going to be interesting to see how the education establishment, how the teachers, how the school boards react. So what you're talking about is transferring a lot of control from the school districts to the state. They also want to make sure that we teach the correct version of history. Just like in Texas. Now in Texas, they do it by having a school textbook commission. In Missouri, they want to do it by having certain things that have to be taught and by giving teachers a special stipend for learning the correct way to teach history and the correct things to say. A $4,000 stipend for about 2 days of seminars to learn what the correct way to teach history is. Of course, that may not be the history we think is correct. I was telling another group, remember the war for Texas, or the Texas War against Mexico? The Texans who rebelled against Mexico signed statements, legal statements, that they would agree to follow the laws of Mexico and convert to the Catholic religion. One of the laws in Mexico was no slavery in Mexico. And yet the Texicans insisted on bringing in slaves primarily from Louisiana, large numbers of them. So in other words, what the Texans call their War of Independence is actually a rebellion against the government they swore an oath to. They don't teach that in Texas. They probably won't teach it in Missouri either if all these things go through. Again, we're going to have the legislature deciding they know more about what kids should learn than teachers and curriculum specialists. Also coming up, it's not just schools they're going after now it's libraries. The Missouri Secretary of State gives out small grants to library districts. He says that gives him the power to review what is on the shelves in libraries. Now, as far as I know, there isn't a library in Missouri that has bound copies of the first 50 years of Playboy magazine on their shelf. There's nothing that most of us would consider pornography probably in any library in Missouri. But their version of objectionable includes things by Maya Angelou and other people who they don't agree with. The Handmaid's Tale. They wouldn't even be allowed to have videos of that if Jay Ashcroft gets his way. Also, another bill that came up, there is one legislator, Jim Murphy from South County, who was mad because the St. Louis Library District built their new headquarters in Frontenac. Now, that may have been a little expensive area to put a library headquarters, but his answer is he has a bill which is gaining traction that would say library districts could not act as other government entities. They would not be able to select their own sites. They would be subject to zoning rules, building location rules, and things like that from county and municipal governments. So if the library said the best place to put this library is over here where there's 2 new schools and a bunch of new subdivisions, the county could say, no, we want to see a Target store there. They could forbid the library from buying that land and putting a library there. All because one state legislator didn't think St. Louis County Library should be in Frontenac. We do have one good thing to talk about in Jeff City right now. After years of being the lowest paid state employees in the nation, last year Missouri employees got a 5% raise. That took us from like 50th to like maybe 47th. To his credit, Mike Parson this year proposed an 8.7% raise for all state employees and a better differential for people who work in direct services, in mental health facilities and veterans homes for late shifts. Now, somehow he got that through the House of Representatives. It's now going to the Senate where its future is a little bit more iffy. Parson wanted that bill signed and on his desk by March 1st so that the state employees could get the money before Easter. That's looking doubtful because 2 problems that some Republicans, especially in the Senate, have. One is that Parson made the mistake of calling it a cost of living raise. Some Republicans are saying if you give cost of living increase this year, people are going to expect a cost of living increase next year, which actually is quite logical. The other thing is a lot of legislators actually think Missouri state employees are already paid as much as they're worth, and all they're doing is griping about wanting more money. Now, Mike Parson did not do this because he's a kind-hearted individual. He did this because right now they admit to 7,000 state jobs being vacant. People closer to the system say it's closer to 9 or 10,000 at least. And some of us who know how understaffed the Department of Social Services and veterans are, think it's closer to 15,000 employees like. They cannot fill those jobs. Part of it's because of the job market, and part of it is because the state is a lousy employer. The head of the Department of Mental Health had to admit to the legislature the other week, there are hundreds of people right now in county jails who the judges have ordered them to go to mental health facilities, secure mental health facilities. The main secure mental health facility in Fulton cannot open all of its wards because they don't have staff. And so there are people who a judge has decided, and probably in many cases, the person agrees as well, need mental health help. And instead they're sitting in county jails because there's no place for them in the mental health facilities. Also, half the beds in our state-run nursing homes for veterans are empty because they can't staff those. So the governor's 8.7% increase across the board and $2 an hour more for night shift workers would hopefully help with that. But right now, one thing that came out during this hearing with the director of mental health was that even with the pay raise, people can make more money by going down the street from the Fulton State Hospital to either the Dollar General warehouse, and there's an Amazon facility being built nearby. The Dollar General warehouse already pays more for warehouse workers than he'll be paying. And it's expected Amazon will raise the wages in that area even higher. So again, we have a big problem with not having enough state workers, and that's because of years of neglect. At the same time, when Mike Parson is trying to correct that, let's hope he gets that 8.7% for them. And let's hope that the state likes the idea of cost of living increases to protect the purchasing power of those state workers. Or otherwise, what we have now are situations, some people wait on hold for 4 hours when they call the Department of Social Services about Medicaid or food stamps. They only wait 4 hours because if you're on the phone like 4 hours and 5 minutes, the state hangs up on you. They can't get enough people to answer phones. They're behind on processing things, and they're looking at a huge burden coming up because Missouri Medicaid is going to start reauthorizing people this spring. During the pandemic, they could just add to the rolls. Now they've got to go through and make sure people are current, their income is correct, their information is correct. It looks like the state, because they're short of help, rather than having the state go through the rolls and do most of the work, we could see hundreds of thousands of Missouri families had to essentially reapply almost from scratch for their Medicaid, because that's less staff intensive if they start from scratch. Now, I didn't know this, but I didn't realize we had a growing danger in the state of Missouri. I didn't realize that drag queens are a threat to children and adults. Caleb Roden, the head of the Senate, has said that drag queens are innately sexual and that they should be prohibited from performing in schools, from being in books and school libraries. And basically, if you're going to have a drag queen show anywhere in Missouri, it should be for 18 and over. That hasn't made Comedy Central yet. Missouri did get on Comedy Central, the BBC, and in the Times of London when they said women could not wear sleeveless dresses in the house, which ironically was the rule, but they got all convoluted. Missouri is a great source of entertainment to the rest of the world right now. And this could be the next thing, the ban on drag queens. Also, now this one, remember how a couple years ago they passed the Second Amendment Preservation Act, where they said the state of Missouri will decide if a federal law on guns adheres to the Second Amendment or not. As a result of that, we have a situation where every day police officers and sheriff's deputies know that convicted felons have guns in their possession, but they're not allowed to refer them to federal prosecution, because if they do, the law enforcement officer could be subject to a $50,000 fine, and their supervisor, the sheriff or police chief, their agency could be fined $50,000 as well. This is not an abstraction. This is happening every day in Missouri, because also they're saying we will not, for example, even look at a requirement that every gun sale go through a licensed federal firearms dealer. The young man who shot up Central Performing Arts High School was turned down on a federal records check at a gun show in St. Charles. He bought his gun from a guy in the aisle, and that was a legal sale in Missouri. Now, because of that problem with Missouri not being able to refer felons to the federal government for prosecution for having a gun, there's another bill up there to solve that problem. The legislature proposes that only felons who commit violent crimes lose their right to have weapons. In other words, stalking, burglary, car theft, you would not lose your right to carry a gun when you got out of jail. You could get a gun the day you got out of jail. So that's something that's their answer to that. Also, there have been incidents in St. Louis City and Kansas City of young people, by which I mean kids who look like they're in grade school or middle school, openly carrying guns on city streets. That is legal in Missouri. The legislature had a chance to advance a bill that would prohibit young people from having guns in their possession in public without an adult being present. They threw it in the trash can. They also threw in the trash can proposals from many of our St. Louis legislators, mostly Democrats, that Missouri enact a red flag law. In other words, if you're in a situation where you have to go to court to get a restraining order against a former spouse or friend, in many states they can make those people surrender their firearms until the situation is settled. In Missouri, they've pledged Missouri will have no red flag law. So even if you've been violating multiple restraining orders, they can't take your guns. A judge cannot use a violation of a restraining order as a reason to deny you your constitutional right to have a firearm. Now let's get really scary. Remember how I told you some of the legislators like Mary Elizabeth Coleman want to ban not just abortion, but Plan B pills and contraception? There is a bill in the legislature that would make it illegal to mail Plan B pills or similar drugs into the state of Missouri. These are legal pharmaceuticals regulated by the FDA coming through the US mail. And while it would still be legal to get Viagra from Canada, you could be arrested for trying to get a Plan B pill through the mail. Now, the big thing is, how do you enforce that law? The only way to enforce that law, if they enact it, would be for the state patrol and local police to censor people's mail and look through the mail. And if there's a question, which would probably be only directed at mail going to women, they would have to open the mail to make sure it did not contain contraband, i.e. Plan B pills or something similar. Now, this is blatantly unconstitutional. However, that Second Amendment Preservation Act is blatantly unconstitutional, but it has not gotten into the federal courts and gotten to a judge who will look at the reality of it. If they pass that bill, it could be 3 to 5 years before the bill could get all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. And with this Supreme Court, I'm not 100% sure they would defend the post office and defend the FDA. So that's a very real possibility. If they get that passed, we'll once again be on the national news for all the wrong reasons. This is not as far-fetched as you might think, because the Attorney General, Andrew Bailey, who got his job by working at a desk in the lobby of Governor Parsons' office, has sent letters already to CVS and Walgreens warning them against dispensing Plan B and similar pills. No morning after pills in Missouri unless you want to run the risk of being arrested if you're a pharmacist. That's very real in Missouri, and unfortunately, I don't see that changing. Page 2. Bill Igo, one of those senators are talking about, doesn't believe in raising taxes, is also supporting a number of efforts to cut taxes. Missouri has a record amount of money in the bank. We're talking billions and billions of dollars. A lot of it is from the pandemic funds, which we never got around to spending. But also, inflation is great for Missouri because our two largest sources of income is the state individual income tax and sales tax. I went out and bought a dozen eggs today. Okay, those eggs cost about twice as much as last year. That meant a couple more cents to the state of Missouri in sales tax. Everything we buy in sales tax goes up. Because of inflation, a lot of people are getting raises. As a result, Missouri is taking in more money than we ever have before from our own people. Now, the problem is a reasonable government would try to match that revenue to its needs. Again, we have thousands of jobs open. We have roads in some places that don't even look like roads anymore. We have schools that need a lot of funds. We have specialty programs for kids with special needs in schools that haven't been funded in years. Instead, the Republicans, a number of them, are talking about institutionalizing a greater series of tax cuts so that not only will we lower the tax rate a little bit this year, we would ratchet it down until the income tax would go below 4%. They're talking about completely eliminating personal property tax in Missouri, which would hurt counties, school districts, fire districts, et cetera. And they're also talking about eliminating the corporate income tax. They've lowered the corporate income tax and said that would cause more businesses to relocate to Missouri. That didn't happen. So they lowered the corporate income tax rate again. And we still didn't get a whole lot of new businesses coming into Missouri. Most of our business growth has been by people who are in companies that are already here. So that's what we're standing and fighting against, because Republicans are so convinced that the thing to do when you have extra money is not fix things, it's cut taxes. Now that means that 5 years down the road, we don't have money for schools, we don't have money for the state patrol to put gas in their cars, so be it. Now, if you look around on the internet, if you watch TV, if you read any national publication, there's a lot of stuff in there about electric vehicles. Ford has an electric truck. GM and Ram are coming out with electric trucks. Honda has an electric truck coming. Audi has an electric SUV. All these companies are creating more and more electric vehicles. So already this year in the Missouri Legislature, the House is pushing forward a bill that would prevent municipalities or counties or other groups from require vehicle charging stations in public areas. Now, part of it is they said they don't want to push the cost on the developers. Okay, that sounds reasonable, except that Missouri keeps talking about how we need tourism as a big part of our economy. If Missouri does not have as many charging stations as other states, are as many people going to go to Lake of the Ozarks or Branson if they know they have to be very careful where they charge their vehicles? What message does it send to the rest of the country when Missouri says, we're not getting on the electric revolution? You can keep your Teslas, you can keep your EV trucks, etc. We're not going to support that in Missouri. We're going to make it harder for people to put in charging stations, even at their own cost on their own property. So that's where their mindset is. One bill has already passed the House. It's called House Bill 301. It started out as a bill by a gentleman named Lane Roberts from Joplin, who decided that he knew what's best for the city of St. Louis. He decided that in his bill, if there were more than 35 murders per 100,000 residents, the St. Louis City Circuit Attorney's Office should be replaced with a special prosecutor appointed for 5 years by the governor. And that St. Louis City would be better if instead of the city running its police department, we went back to a board of police commissioners appointed by the governor. The St. Louis City Police Officers Association and the Ethical Society for Police, the African American similar organization, have both endorsed this plan because in the language is an automatic $4,000 raise for every officer in the police department. Plus the fact that as state employees, they would be subject to Jefferson City and the city would have no control of the police department. All they'd be able to do is object if they the state was charging them too much money for their police. The current speaker, Dean Clocker from Des Peres, has decided he wants an orderly house this year, which isn't happening very well. So he said that each committee will only be able to report out 2 bills before spring break. And if a bill is not on the floor by spring break, its chances of going anywhere in Jeff City go way down. As a result, Lane Roberts' bill to rein in the St. Louis Circuit Attorney and change the police department now has 7 other things attached to it. Some are good. One section that got attached to it started out as a bill to help inmates coming out of prison do things like apply for Medicaid, learn about housing rules and things like that. Another part of it was that the terms of confinement and release are a little more clear. So in other words, you don't have these situations where people are stuck in jail for weeks and months on end when they shouldn't be because of gray areas in the law. That's good. Some other things, though, aren't so good. For example, school officers commission could be commissioned by the school board to carry guns on school property, on school buses, at school events, and in the community surrounding the school. Now, there is no requirement in the law that these people have law enforcement training or similar background in carrying a gun and using a weapon. And they would be commissioned, again, not by the sheriff or the police chief or by the state, they'd be commissioned by the school board. Think about that. Somebody walking the halls of a school with a gun because their school board member's unemployed nephew. That's where we're at in Missouri. Again, only violent felons would have to be banned from having guns. Also, one thing which is maybe good, but it's going to be expensive. Right now, law enforcement officers in most of Missouri have to pay for their own training. Mineral Area College, Jefferson College, a whole bunch of other places have law enforcement training programs. And most of the sheriff's deputies and a lot of the police officers, even some in this area, have to go to places like that to get their training for their commission. There's a bill to try to get more people into law enforcement that would give them, if they stayed 1 year in law enforcement, they'd get a refund for 25% of their tuition. 2 years, 50%, up to after 4 years, they'd get a reimbursement for all their tuition. Now, that appears to be set up so it would create an industry where young people going to law enforcement would go to specialty lenders who would lend them the money for their tuition, and then they would only pay interest until they got their years in and it got paid off by the state. The problem is a lot of these programs, most of them are like 13, 14 months long, and most of them cost like $30,000, $40,000. If the state of Missouri starts paying $40,000 for each new sheriff's deputy and police officer in much of the state, that's a huge unfunded mandate. It's going to be very, very expensive. And the thing is, your larger areas like St. Louis County, St. Louis City, Kansas City, Missouri State Patrol, they want officers trained by their people. And so what happens? Does that mean that St. Louis County gets to send a bill to Jeff City every year for the young people they train to become police officers? It sounds like a good idea, but it's very open-ended. It's probably going to lead to inflation in those programs. And it's going to cost the state a lot of money. And worse than that, is an unknown amount of money. Because you look around the state and a lot of police departments are really shorthanded. If there are people coming out of the military or coming out of community college who decide they want to become a police officer, and they know they only have to stick it out 4 years, they can get that $40,000 worth of training, $40,000, that's going to be a mess. It's going to be hard to figure out. And it means Jeff City's gonna have to write a lot of checks. So I see a number of things in the chat. So any questions anybody have? Sorry, it's depressing, but unfortunately, Jefferson City is a very depressing place. So if you have a question, if you want to unmute yourself and raise your hand, I'll try to answer it.
Yeah, we're open for questions from the floor, if anyone has a question. Well, I'll get things. Oh,
Judith is
Judith,
raising her hand.
go
Is
ahead.
there any good news?
Well, the pay raise for workers would be
Yeah.
good.
But
And there are a lot of little things that they do, very technical things they do. The problem is the good that they do is overwhelmed by the stupid and the bad that they do. And like I said, there is a crisis in state government, lack of workers. I don't know if you saw the article in the Post-Dispatch and the Missouri Independent.
yeah,
There are units within the children's division that had 300% turnover in the last fiscal year. So they've got to stop that bleeding. So that's good that they're at least the governor is paying attention to it, if he can drag the legislature along.
I have a question.
Mhm.
It's the obvious question, what is the best way for us to get involved to maybe make a difference with any of these horrible things?
Even the Republican legislators read their emails. If you can go to Jeff City and testify against the bill that you find especially egregious, that helps too. The one warning I'll give you is the Senate has adopted a rule this year that if you send in written testimony, it only gets included in their minutes if you're there to present it yourself. So no more mailing in testimony and getting the same impact. You've got to drive to Jeff City and sit through the hearing, which isn't hard. It's not bad. The form is only like 5 lines, and I've done it dozens and dozens of times, and other people have done it a lot. But they do look at, if they get 3 or 4 messages on a particular bill, that's a lot in most cases. Keep in mind though, the last survey I saw showed like 85% of Missourians do not know who their state rep is. So if you can get 20 messages to a state rep, emails or letters in the mail, they'll notice that. And they start hearing a lot of things from people and from groups about problems. Like, I don't want my child not being able to get, a Margaret Atwood book out of a library. I don't want my child not getting taught Algebra 2 because they can't get teachers. They do listen to us. Even small numbers can have an impact because there are so few people who contact them. And they don't know if you're Democrat or Republican unless you've met them personally and they've seen your little, lapel pin. So, anybody else? Yes, Lori.
I just wanted to point out 2 things. The one is about what Jay Ashcroft is doing. I have been for many years doing voter registration. I like to go to the high schools during the senior lunchtime, and I go to the community college and stay there for hours getting voters registered. I did this at Forest Park Community College and Florissant Valley Community College before the last election. And I had to get a form from Jay Ashcroft, and I had to sign it that stated that I was not going to be paid to do the voter registration. I've never been paid to do voter registration. And because I'm an educator who taught social studies and science for more than 20 years, I believe in democracy, and voter registration is part of that. In my opinion, this is voter suppression.
Yes.
And I am so angry at Jay Ashcroft. And I also think Jay Ashcroft has certain ambitions to go to higher office, and he's trying to make a name for himself among Republicans. That is so obvious.
He is an undeclared candidate for governor. Everybody expects him to run for governor. The irony is, for years, Republicans wanted more people on the voter rolls because they wanted more people to vote for them. Now that they've got control, they want fewer people on the voter rolls. I remember I ran in 2016 for state rep, and I had blank voter registration cards on my clipboard. And if somebody said they weren't a registered voter, you just automatically, and I knew my Republican opponent was doing the same thing. We always wanted more people to get, signed up. That's not really the policy now. And in fact, the Republicans are talking about a closed primary where you'd have to be literally a card carrying Republican to vote in the primary. What they're afraid of was that Democrats are going to come into the primary and vote for, I don't know, any former governor come to mind who we might want to see run again so we can defeat him again? Any other questions?
Over here.
Yes, Judith.
Oh, my husband Greg.
Okay.
Yeah, 2 points on the Ashcroft book ban. I would encourage people to check out Kevin McDermott's.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
He addresses a
Get closer to the microphone.
What was that, Judith? What did he say?
Okay, now can you, okay.
okay. Can you hear me now?
Not really.
Okay,
Never mind.
wait, just, he could hear me. I don't know. Can you hear
Yeah,
me?
if you want to type it into the chat, or if you want to try and figure out what's going on your end, we can move on to Nancy. Nancy, go ahead and ask your question, and then Judith's husband can maybe we can figure that out.
It's not exactly a question, but tomorrow at noon in the House elections and elected officials or something close to that committee, there is a House Bill 783, which was put on there by McGaw, and it specifically says they're going to get rid of the form that you've been filling out for Secretary of State. Right now, it's on hold because of a court case. So there's a stay against it, but it could come back. And HB 783, it does several things, but that's one of the things that it does. So you can write testimony tonight. Last time that committee met, I did not watch it, but McGaw is actually a Republican and things got very ugly in the committee.
There's a lot going in within the Republican Party. Right now, the best fights to watch are in the Senate between the really, really conservative Republicans and the crazy, really, really conservative Republicans. Last year,
Yeah,
they had a conservative caucus, which tied the Senate up in knots. The conservative caucus dissolved because basically they won. They have enough members now. You cannot get a majority of the Republicans without the conservative caucus group. So, and in fact, there are probably going to be bills that later this session where deals are going to be made with the 8 Democrats because the Democratic senators will hold sway because Republicans won't be able to unite around things. Because again, you have some like Mary Elizabeth Coleman, McShore, and so on, who are so far out there. They'd be right at home standing next to Kevin McCarthy in Washington.
well, I was just kind of responding to the woman who said she doesn't like doing that form. I guess it was Lois. So tomorrow there's going to be a hearing. So go and send your testimony tonight.
Yeah, I'm still trying to figure out how he could put on those rules when motor voter is still the federal law, but oh well. Silly me, I thought federal law trumped state law.
Only for federal election.
True, but November and August ballots have federal candidates on them. And we don't have a separate, registration for municipal elections, so.
Judith, would you like, would your husband like to try again?
He had to take a call. So he had to leave.
Okay.
Sorry, thanks.
Okay, apparently we have 2 hands raised.
Dale and Dave, why don't you go first?
Okay, I want to suggest another way of making your voice heard in Jefferson City, and that is that frequently different organizations sponsor a trip to lobby in Jefferson City, and so you can You could go with a group that, if you watch the local papers or your own mail, you will frequently find a bus going, and that's sort of a fun way to do things because you're not so off on your own.
All of the bills coming up for hearings can be viewed on the website for the House and Senate. So you know when the bill is coming up. And anybody can walk in and sign a form and testify. And it's not a bad day trip. I don't recommend eating in the cafeteria anymore. And it is hard finding parking, but you can go in there and you can still influence things. And especially if you explain like why you're related, like I'm a former teacher, this bothers me because, right now I'm trying to get a group together to lobby on the food pantry tax credit because they haven't raised that for years. And as a result, last year, those of us who claimed it only got 71 cents on the dollar we were supposed to get. And so we're having to work behind the scenes to get Democrats and Republicans to sponsor an increase in that so that doesn't happen again. Because we're afraid if people only get 71 cents on the dollar or less, they won't have that incentive anymore to give the extra money to the food pantry. So, but again, that's being done grassroots. And when the time comes, we'll have 15 or 20 people from food pantries around the state magically appear in the chairs in that committee room.
Just don't bring your gun. That's the only place in the state you can't have it.
The legislators can carry guns. The legislators can carry guns on the floor of the House or the Senate even, but yes, we cannot bring our own guns. However, if you ask your legislator, maybe they'll loan you one.
There is a legislator that has volunteered. If you want to visit his office, he'll arm you.
Yes, I saw that, yes. And also in the last 5 years, the last count I heard was that 4 guns have been found in the men's rooms, where gentlemen take their gun off when they're in the bathroom, and forget to put it back in their holster when they leave. So if you know somebody who's on a tight budget and they just can't afford that new gun, I try the Senate side. The restrooms are nicer.
Debbie Kitchen, you have a question?
I have a comment. I got a email today, and I think everybody on this call needs to make a note of what I'm going to read you. You're talking about legislative action. You need to know these groups, you need to find them, and you need to join them. These are the current grassroots groups that are doing everything in Jeff City. The first one is AAUW. The second is Jobs with Justice. We go to Women's Foundation of Greater St. Louis. Missouri, NEA. Kansas City Library. Mo Equity Education Partnership. Empower Missouri. National Council of Jewish Women, St. Louis. Women's Voices Raised for Social Justice. A Red Circle. Moms Demand Action in Everytown. Promo. Planned Parenthood. Pro-Choice Missouri. Mo Voter Protection Coalition. Let me stop here and say, these are Monday morning calls at 10 a.m. Everybody's welcome to get on the email list. Text MOVPC to 66866. You will get notified of the meetings with the link, and you'll get the emails for all the legislative action on voter suppression bills with Denise Lieberman. We have League of Women Voters. We have the National Women's Political Caucus. We're 47 days into this session, 81 days to go, including 1 week of spring break. Multiple elections or municipal elections, are coming up, and those have become increasingly partisan. Sign on to help school board and aldermanic candidates. Start making a list of festivals, parades, etc. in your area where Dems could have a presence. That was sent to me by Trish Gumby, and I know she's sharing it all over. So that's who you need to find. That's who you need to connect to, because they are lobbying in Jeff City every week, depending on when the hearings are. And we have a great legislative tracker on MOVPC's website and Facebook page. So we can all be involved. We can all be involved. Thanks.
I'm going to give away one of my secret tips. Autophagian with the MNEA does probably the best summary of legislation affecting education directly and indirectly. If you can get on Otto's email list, his summaries come out almost every day in the session. He follows, I don't know how he follows all these hearings, but his summaries are always right on point and very factual. So keep.
OEP is doing that for you as well. And they are also doing a candidate scorecard for you to check every school board candidate in your area, city, and county. We got great groups doing great stuff.
One other thing to remember too, when you go to Jeff City, take the time, even if you're not going to see your state rep or your state senator in a hearing, stop by their office. They're very seldom there during the session. However, they almost all have visitor logs, and they generally have nice people working for them. You can talk to them for a second, write a little note in the visitor log, etc. Establish that communication and get on their email list. I get emails from 3 or 4 Republicans who are so diametrically opposed to my way of thinking, but it's nice to know what they're thinking and what they think the important issues are. And they give reports to their constituents, just like people like LaDonna.
Well, I don't necessarily want to interrupt the flow of what we can do to make things better, but I do have a a question of, it seems like we have a lot of legislators who have an agenda. I think that's, to say the least. All the stuff you went through. Are the voters in the rural, I assume I know that these are all rural legislators for the most part. Are the voters really behind them, or do they not realize what these folks stand for?
I think that varies. Remember what I said earlier, years ago, they did a survey and 85% of Missourians could not name their state rep. After the election, people seem to lose interest in their state reps and state senators. Andrew Koenig has moderated a little bit, but he's been a pretty rabid anti-tax guy and a pretty rabid school choice guy, even though he represents West County. A lot of those people are from rural areas, but not all of them. And the thing to remember, though, is that I think like 42 or so of the state reps got their job by paying their filing fee. They had no opponent in the primary or the general election. So they paid their filing fee and they're now a state rep. Sometimes some of your more out there people, like Mike Moon, I don't think he's ever had an opponent until the Senate race the other year. When he was a state rep, I don't think he ever had a challenger. And he's the one who killed a chicken to show he was against abortion. I really can't describe it any better than that. It was that crazy on YouTube.
Lynn, I want to jump in because I've worked down in Mo 8. I'm from Cape Girardeau, and I'm part of Indivisible CMO as well. The problem down there is Democrat is such a dirty word that we can't get them on. We cannot get anybody to run. We have districts with no D on the ballot. There's no choice. You do that 3 elections, they're Republican. We let that happen. So we have a lot of work to do as far as outreach to our rural communities. And I will say that Jess Piper is on it big time with the new Blue Missouri, the crowdfunding source that used to be, it starts today. She's now the executive director. She's also helping with us getting candidates in these corners, like the northwest corner, northeast corner, southeast, north or southwest. Crystal Quaid has done a bang up job with the southwest corridor. They are there. I think she brought what, 5 new Democrats this election from that area. I think it was that something. like
Yeah, it
that.
was a net flip of 3, but I think there were 5 or 6 new legislators.
Miraculous.
To
But
show you how bad
seriously,
it is,
we have to do some what we call deep conversations
Mhm.
in rural. We're going to need teams of people that will go door to door. We got to start it now because they've got to go develop a relationship. They have to have a conversation. We have to gain trust because if we don't do that, we will never, ever gain back the rural area. So I don't think you have a democratic structure that is speaking to that need, but I hope somebody on this call is hearing me.
show you how bad things are. The sheriff of St. Genevieve County was a 3rd-generation elected Democratic official. He's now a Republican. To keep his job, he thought he had to flip to the R's. So it's bad out there, and it's not going to get. It's going to take years to rebuild. This didn't fall apart overnight. It's going to take years to rebuild, unless we have a 1974 moment. Some of you may have remembered after President Ford pardoned President Nixon, there were Democrats who were down in the polling 10, 15 points who won on election night because people were so unhappy with Republicans in general because of what Gerald Ford did that they voted for any Democrat just about. Without a situation like that, it's going to take a long time to build things. It's going to be district by district, door by door. So, although we do have Donald Trump who might bring us that moment.
No, they don't believe it. They won't believe it. It's insane. You've never seen anything like it. If there's such a thing as a cult, it exists in Missouri. And I will say that rural Missouri is killing progressive politics in this state. And as long as we let them sit there and not get educated and welcomed in, we are not going to win this. I mean, I'm being really, I know I'm being dire, but I'm being really serious.
Our last statewide election win was for auditor, and Miss Galloway only carried 5 counties. Fortunately, they were the right 5 counties.
Yeah, and she also had a stupid opponent and she barely won.
Mm-hmm.
What about all the counties that don't have Democrat central committees, that you have no structure down there? There's a lot of that going on.
Yes, and we're going to have to rebuild it. And it's going to take time. And
Yeah, that's one of the things that the MDP Rural Caucus is focusing on. I know they are trying to do a lot of work around that, and like you said, Debbie, it's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take multiple cycles of them working and working and working. You know, we're fortunate here that we've got an infrastructure in place. I don't know that we always do the best job of connecting our central committee to, you know, the people on the ground, and that's the job of people like me on the central committee, right? I mean, it's our job to do what we can. You know, Dale and Dave, I know you have done a really good job of that for a long time, and so it's good for those of us who are newer on it to see what we can do to reach out and do a much better job of connecting sort of the central committee is not even a high level infrastructure, but connecting it down to the grassroots and to the people who, the people who are going to do this work is all of us. It's the people on the ground. Nobody is coming to save us. We are who we have. And we got to do a better job as leadership, as those of us on this call who are engaged at cultivating the troops to get that done.
one thing too to remember is Missouri right now is not bringing new people into the state, in part because of our attitudes, in part because of our laws, and in part because of a very blatant anti-immigrant approach from Republicans. Right now, unless Missouri can bring in a net increase of 130,000 people in the rest of this decade, we will go from 8 members of the House of Representatives to 7 in 2030. Now, I remember when we had 12 members of Congress from Missouri. Now we're down to 8. The only good news is if that happens, there will still be 2 rock solid Democratic districts in the state. So the Republicans will go from being 6 of 8 to 5 of 7. So. Yes. Yes, Judith.
You're
Okay.
muted.
Does the rural areas have internet access? Most of the rural areas have internet access?
Define internet access in rural area. The city of Wildwood has been going after grants to get rural broadband in Wildwood because their 3-acre lot areas qualify. Outstate Missouri, there are parts of the state where the phone system is so obsolete. They have trouble getting into the queue when they call the Department of Social Services call centers. The state wasn't able to put call centers in a few towns in the deep Ozarks where they had high unemployment because they couldn't get the infrastructure from AT&T. So we're talking about areas that are maybe just above dial-up. We're talking about areas where streaming Netflix is probably a dream.
Yeah.
But
How
again,
about newspapers? How about
I gotta answer, I gotta address this, Glenn. I'm so sorry. Their newspapers are no longer daily. They may receive the Southeast Missourian is their largest paper. The Rust Communications Incorporated own 46 of the newspapers in Southern Missouri. They do not do dailies. They may do once a week. They were doing 3 times a week, but now my brother-in-law is getting it on the weekends. The kids, I'm not joking, down in Crothersville, they've got 2 librarians there that are Democrats, and they are beautiful women. They have made a library that included a theater for performing arts, and the children in that community go to the library to do their homework. There are places in Kennett that the children go to McDonald's and sit in the parking lot to do their homework. When you hear about this on national news, I want you to know you're sitting on it. Missouri is it. All of that stuff is going on right here. And we are so unaware of our state. And we're in the city, we're in our bubble. I've been working in the city area for 6 years, trying to drag people down to show them this problem and this work that needs to be done. And the actual Central Committee in Cape Girardeau County is horrible. They don't do a thing. They don't get anything done. So, and that's your largest regional hub. So there's just tons of work to do. And I'm sorry I interrupted.
I'm glad you did. I didn't know how bad it was.
It's
in the rural
bad
area.
is an understatement.
Yeah.
Kathy, have your hand up?
Yes, I just wanted to say that I listen to a lot of podcasts and things, and I think that the message cannot be, we're going to help you if you're not doing well. The message has to be, we know that you are working hard. We know that you're the backbone of America. We know that you're the strongest people in our country, and we're behind you. It has to be something not to appeal to any kind of aggrieved people who need help, because that makes, from everything I read and listen to, that makes rural people angry that they might have to accept help that they think they didn't earn. So we've got to change the message to say, we are behind you as the hardworking backbone of America. We're going to help you succeed more than you have. And I think, Glenn said, if Donald Trump could give us I think if he becomes the nominee, that would work against us. I think that would make everybody think, yay, that's wonderful. I don't know. That's all I have.
Nancy?
Well, there is a broadband bill, and it's not going anywhere. That's in the House. The issues with the broadband are in the country, there's no coverage, and in the city where people can't afford it. So those are the 2 prongs we need to address. Missouri got a ton of money from, I believe it was feds, to work on this issue. And so we need to keep it in the spotlight.
Eric Schmidt has said that it's a priority for him to get high-speed broadband into the rural communities in Missouri.
And I think, if somebody pushes it, it will happen, but you don't hear it talked about.
I think it's the way that this infrastructure bill was written. And I think what got in the way here are some co-ops. And I think we have to do a better job of actually reading the bills and understanding what they're going to do for you. Because I think what happened is instead of everybody getting broadband, they're going to go down to certain co-ops in certain areas. And I don't know how that all works. Some people say equitable, some people say no. I don't know. But the broadband thing was addressed, I believe, in the infrastructure bill.
And the other thing is that there's, like anything else, they try to run through farmland. And I understand this. People don't want it coming through their lane. So that's another real issue in the rural parts.
I have a question. Does anybody have any suggestions? I'm a member of quite a few nonprofit organizations, and I'm letting my neighbors and friends know about all the bills, but it's overwhelming them. I mean, you say something about, I'd like you to, here we have Sierra Club over here. Here we have Americans United over here, National Council of Jewish Women, League of Women Voters. And I started sending out, and I'm getting feedback from others saying, I don't have time to do 5 bills. If you want me to, email my senators or something, and these are not even my senators. These are the senators on the committees or the House reps. And so I'm trying to determine when to send them out, and they don't like to do things on Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday at the beginning of the week if they have families and kids, because they're so busy as it is. So how do you determine which bills, 2 or 3 bills at the most at a week, and that sort of thing? And when do you have them send out comments, testimony? Okay.
I'll add a couple of things there. One, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday are probably the more important days of the week, because if you wait till Thursday or Friday, they're not in session anymore. They're not in the office. So a smaller lift on those early days is better than a bigger lift later in the week, usually. Second, you could ask them what particular issue matters to you. If it's transgender rights, then just here's promos list. Or if it's educational equity regarding race, then here's MOEP. If it's don't try to give them everything. Try to tailor individual things to individual people. I'll stop there, and if anybody else wants to jump in.
That's a great way to address that. Find their passion. Listen to the people that are telling you to show up because they are putting 1, 2, 3 bills on fire. They're telling you what they need you to react to. And I will tell you, if they're interested in voter suppression, you cannot beat the MOVPC group with Denise Lieberman. She is the litigator. She goes in the courtroom to litigate for us. So you can't beat that organization if you want to know what's going on. Every Monday, 10 a.m. to get on the list, text MOVPC to 66866. You'll get an email. You'll get the link to the Zoom meeting every Monday. You will get also an action email anytime she's doing anything. All of these organizations will put you in touch with what they need you to do.
No, I'm involved in all those organizations. It was just going back and trying to shift through it to send out emails and not include every bill there was, because there are so many regressive bills. It's just frightening.
Oh, it's awfully, it's frightening.
Yeah. So I'm doing a lot with the IP bill now for the last couple of weeks, and then some of the trans And I mean, Sierra Club's got a list too. I mean, everybody's got a list. That's it.
Well, if you notice, part of that is because Missouri does not limit how many bills a legislator can propose. Some states do. The result is we have hundreds and hundreds of bills that have no chance of going anywhere. And because you've got a speaker who wants to limit each committee to 2 bills going to the floor, you get monstrosities like that House Bill 301 that started with bad stuff. Then they added more bad stuff to it. Then they added a little bit of not so bad stuff to it and a couple of good things to it. So it goes out on the floor. It's suddenly a 20 or 30-page bill, which probably no one on the committee has probably read in the version that's going to the floor. Everything tacked on and taped together.
I had a suggestion. I get probably close to 1,000 emails a day because of so many different activities that I am very concerned about. And I do the emailing to my representatives and senators. But like my sister, she has one main concern, and that is the proliferation of guns. So I told her, get on the list for Moms Demand Action or Everytown. So she gets those. And so when they send her an email, she replies to it. She sends the email to her senator and to her representatives. So that's her. I couldn't have told her each time, oh, send this email, send this email. So I just said, get on the email list for these organizations. And so she works with what her passion is. So talk to your friends and see what their main passion is or passions, and then hook them up with the appropriate organization.
And again, sometimes 5 or 10 comments to one legislator may be a lot. So if they sense there's pushback to the minors with guns, minors in possession of guns without adults, maybe they'll moderate their position on that. If a bunch of people say, well, I'm really worried about kids walking down the street with loaded guns. I don't want them shooting out my windows or my cat.
There was even a bill, and I don't know where it is. I don't think it's very far along. But it was that if you're, say, a shop owner and you don't let somebody bring their gun in your shop, and anything happens to that person because you made them leave their gun outside, you are so liable.
That probably won't get anywhere, but that's the thinking of some of that fringe of the right wing in the current Republican Party in the House, especially.
And one more question. Is it better to send emails to the senator or the House? Where do you put the email in? At the House or the Senate? I understand the second reading, but it's, and then they change numbers.
That's the problem. You have to follow the bill pretty closely. And a lot of times I'll take my text from an email on the House version, change a couple lines and send it to the senators when it gets over to the other side of the building. But that's a problem. There's a lot there to follow.
Yeah.
And it's hard to predict sometimes what's going to come out because there are so many things going on in the background we don't know about. Like maybe so-and-so's made a deal to get his bill heard. So he's pushing a deal with this senator to get this done.
There's also a good online resource called Fast Democracy.
Yes.
.org or .com, I'm not sure which. But you can research all kinds of bills, put keywords in, it'll find related bills. My favorite is that there was an anti-abortion statement or whatever hidden in a transportation bill that had to do with helping people cross the border, the state lines. But no one would have thought to look in a transportation bill for that.
Yeah, it is fastdemocracy.com, and there's like 30 or 40 categories. I think my problem is I put in too many interest, and then they come out, every morning or late night, like near midnight or something, they hit you and you're like, oh my God, there's 30 bills, and then you're
Harvey,
trying.
we started using the protocol of raising your hand to speak, and we somehow have gotten away from that.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry about that. Mark, it looks like you have a question out there.
Yeah, I do. I guess, the one issue that I think about is gun control. And, we talk about these rural legislators and, from what I understand, the Democratic Party doesn't support candidates who aren't for gun control. And to get somebody in Kennett or Hayti or wherever else you'd like to mention, even St. Charles County, to vote for somebody who is for gun control seems nearly impossible. So, how do you reconcile that with the need for support from those areas?
We actually have a few Democrats who are NRA members. And in fact, we had a special election a few years ago on the High Ridge Fenton line, where the young man who won was an NRA member. Unfortunately, he got beat in the next general election by Mary Elizabeth Coleman starting her career going. But that can't be an absolute. The problem is, you look at what the Republicans want to do with guns in Missouri. We are a test bed for really bad ideas on guns, because we did things. Remember, we voted down concealed carry as an initiative petition item. Then they enacted it without us. Then they enacted constitutional carry. So now anybody who doesn't think they're enfeebled and hasn't committed the right crime can put a gun in their pocket and walk down the street. There are other states now getting to that level of craziness that we've been at for a few years. On food stamps, here's a similar bill. Missouri is one of the first states to push a bill to criminalize using your food stamps for Oreos or canned tuna. It didn't get out of Missouri because we were able to lobby against it, because it's against the food stamp rules to discriminate about foods in general. Like, you can't just say no seafood, no steak, etc. However, that same bill has now been introduced in more than a dozen other states, including states like Ohio, which you would think have enough people to have a little bit of common sense.
But getting back to the point, I mean, regardless of how crazy those bills may be, if I come from Kennett or Hayti, as Debbie pointed out, and I say I'm against that bill, that's the kiss of death. And, and the Democrats aren't going to support, or you say they supported a candidate once like that. I don't know how much money the state gave to them, the state committee, but, that's a rarity, and it's going to continue to be a rarity if if Democrats are forced to declare that I'm for gun control,
When you go to outstate Missouri, a lot of the people there see St. Louis and Kansas City, and to a certain extent Columbia, as threats to their freedom. We have crime. They think the answer to crime is guns. Where were the abortion clinics in Missouri? In the big cities. They all know, because they're told every Sunday, abortion is wrong, wrong, wrong. They've pushed us into a corner in a way, and we've let them. We no longer have, even though the majority of people, for example, on abortion, think it should at least be allowed in cases of rape or incest or mother's health. What's happened is they've taken their position, and now they're arguing that even a Plan B pill should be illegal, and there should be no exceptions for anything.
I think abortion used to be the same kind of issue as gun control until the Supreme Court decision, but that decision was extreme enough that I think it, in some ways, works in favor of the Democrats. And we've seen that in a state like Kansas, where, something you can now say, I'm for abortion under certain circumstances and get away with it. You can't say the same thing with respect to guns, as far as I can see, and get the support of the Democrats, and you're going to lose in Kennett, Hayti, name any other rural community you want to in Missouri.
I see Debbie has her hand raised. Debbie, you have a question?
The
Debbie's a
phone.
little busy
You're on
right
the
now.
phone.
Okay, well, we'll have to deal with that later. I did hear the person who put the gun bill into the kids needed to be escorted by an adult in order to carry a weapon in public. That the committee that looked at that was in favor of it, which had a lot of Republicans on it, and that the bill was very clearly, I haven't read it, but it very clearly stated that hunting on private property was not restricted at all, that young kids could still go out and hunt and do all that. It was more just, walking down the street in the public square. And it's interesting that the committee Republicans were, for the most part, in favor of it, according to her, but yet it didn't pass.
Right. Because gun control is a third rail for them. And they can't, they put
And I see
restrictions on
Debbie is
kids with
back.
guns. The next thing
Yes,
you know,
I'm
they're gonna
back
be
and I have
banging on your
something to
door.
say. I just talked to Randy McCallion and I want to tell you how she handled gun control in Missouri's 8th. She is a responsible gun owner. She's a farmer. Of course she needs guns. Her and her husband both hunt. They love to hunt. They love to target practice. But at the same time, she's a responsible gun owner. And she feels that people in her district agreed with her more than they did not agree, that gun owners want responsible gun ownership, gun safety, gun sense safety. Nobody's coming for your guns. I'm kind of tired of hearing that. Democrats have never come for your guns. They're not going to come for your guns now. But we want responsible gun owners. That's all that the moms demand. And Newtown, or every town, that's what they advocate, is that we lock them up and that we're responsible owners and that we handle our firearms in a responsible way. Nobody's saying we don't want you to have a gun.
And have
But
training.
that's how she handled it, and it worked well for her. She is running again. Let's hope she can even make more inroads against the famous Jason Smith.
The thing is, there are reasonable people, but the people who control a lot of those lobbying groups are not the reasonable ones. They're the ones out in the fringe, and they're the ones who put in the time with the sportsmen's groups and the gun groups. So their fringe idea, for example, there are some people in Missouri who think we should all be allowed to have machine guns as long as they're made in Missouri. Because they claim a gun made in Missouri, carried or owned by a Missourian, is completely exempt from federal regulation.
And we are
Okay.
allowing these folks to be elected.
Wow. Are there any other questions or comments? We're approaching the end of our normal meeting time. We can keep this going, but for those of you that do have to leave, I want to say a great big thank you to Dave Steinberg for years as our Maryland Heights Township committee person. Thank you, Dave, for your service. And there are many others. Oh, and LaDonna Applebaum joined us a little bit after we started and was having some issues with her microphone. And she has been online. I assume she's still there. With that, if you folks want to continue, that's fine. But I did want to let you know that we've hit our regular ending time.
I'm going to take off. It was a great meeting. It was great to hear everybody's comments and to learn more. But I need to eat, so I'm going to go.
I'm sorry it's so depressing.
That's always, as long as you see others who also want to be involved for a good fight, because that's what it is. And it's not going to be short. There's some video going around, well, National Council, no, it was Jewish Community Relations Council had Jeff Smith on. Guess that was last week. And, you know, we're not in good shape, and it's going to be a long, hard battle to try to change people. But I thought maybe getting the internet and having newspapers helping, you know, soften up some people's opinions and realize, you know, how we feel is not against everything, you know?
No. If you look at the daily subscribers for the Post-Dispatch, it's under 200,000 now. Newspapers are dinosaurs. It's all social media.
Thank you, Harvey. We're going to drown our sorrow in ice cream now.
If
Bye.
anyone wants to save the chat, now's a good time to do that. Well, we still have a few minutes. If you need any help saving the chat, just speak up. We'll walk you through it. Okay. Glenn, this has been a very informative evening. I think motivating for a lot of us. We'd love to hear some better news about our state, but, you know, it's important that we all face reality and do what we can to further develop our democracy, protect our population. And I really appreciate all the work that you have done in the past and that you're doing now.
Thank you.
So with that, I think we will call it a night.
Bye.
Thanks again.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye all.